I, Sarah Thompson, was about to embark on a new chapter in my life. At 35, 6 months pregnant, and mother to 3-year-old Ethan, I gazed at my reflection in the mirror, gently placing my hand on my swollen belly. "Mommy, will Santa come to Grandma's house too?" Ethan asked, his face filled with concern. I smiled and replied, "Of course, sweetie. Santa comes everywhere." I could hear Michael, my husband, loading the car with our luggage. We were preparing to head to my in-laws' house for the Christmas holiday. To be honest, I had mixed feelings about this visit. Ready to go. Michael poked his head in. His warm smile eased my anxiety a bit. "Yes, I'm all set," I answered. As we got into the car, Ethan was bubbling with excitement, but I still felt uneasy inside. My relationship with Margaret, my mother-in-law, had never been particularly good. During the 3-hour journey, I gazed out the window, reminiscing about past encounters with my mother-in-law. The subtle jabs at our wedding, her cold attitude when Ethan was born. But this time would be different. Surely, she'd be happy about the birth of this new life. Reassuring myself, I took a deep breath as we approached the large house of my in-laws. "We're here, Ethan. Let's go see Grandma and Grandpa." As the front door opened, Margaret appeared. She wore a festive red sweater and sported a perfect smile. "Well, welcome," Margaret exclaimed. "Michael, Sarah, and little Ethan too. How wonderful to see you all looking so well." There was warmth in her voice, but something felt off to me. I could have sworn I saw her smile freeze for just a moment when her eyes landed on my belly. "Hello, Mother," I greeted her politely. "Oh, Sarah. Pregnancy must be tough," Margaret said. "Especially at your age." I couldn't help but wince at her words. Michael cleared his throat, trying to ease the tension. "Mom, where's Dad?" "Your father's in his study. On a work call, he says." Margaret answered. "Come on in now. It's chilly out here." As we entered the living room, a cozy fire crackled in the fireplace. Ethan's eyes immediately lit up at the sight of presents under the Christmas tree. "Ethan, don't touch," I gently admonished. "Oh, let him be," Margaret interjected. "It's silly to make a child wait when there are still 2 days until Christmas Eve." I bit my tongue, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest at our differing parenting philosophies. During dinner, Margaret suddenly broached a subject. "So, Sarah, what about your job? After the second one is born?" I paused, carefully choosing my words. "I'm still considering my options. I thought I'd wait and see how things go with the baby." "I see." There was a hint of disappointment in Margaret's voice. "But children need their mother's love, don't they? Especially when they're little." Her words stung. Didn't Margaret understand how I struggled with balancing work and motherhood? That night, as we lay in the guest room bed, I confided in Michael. "Your mother doesn't really accept me, does she?" Michael hugged me close and said softly, "It'll be okay. Mom's just a worrier. Time will sort things out." His words comforted me a little, but deep down, I still felt uneasy. Would anything change during this stay? With these thoughts, I closed my eyes. On Christmas Eve, the house was quiet. After putting Ethan to bed, I headed to the bathroom to wash off some cake frosting that had gotten in his hair. "Come on, Ethan. Bath time," I called gently. As I filled the bathtub, snow began to fall quietly outside the window. Ethan was chattering excitedly. "Mommy, has Santa come yet? I can't wait for the presents." I smiled and answered, "Not yet, sweetie. Santa comes after everyone's asleep." Just as I was about to reach for the shampoo with Ethan in the water, the room suddenly went dark. A power outage. "Oh my," I said, confused, trying to find the switch by touch. "Mommy, I'm scared," Ethan's voice quivered. "It's okay, honey. Mommy's right here," I tried to reassure him. But in the next moment, something unexpected happened. I slipped on the bath mat, losing my balance. With my large pregnant belly, it was difficult to regain my footing. "Ah!" I cried out as I fell backward. A sharp impact as my head hit the tiles. Intense pain shot through me, and I felt myself losing consciousness. The last thing I heard was Ethan screaming, "Mommy! Mommy! Wake up!" His voice faded away as I completely blacked out. I'm not sure how much time passed. I vaguely heard voices. "Sarah! Sarah!" Michael's desperate calls. "Call an ambulance. Quickly." My father-in-law's voice. And faintly, I heard Margaret's voice. Oh my, what a terrible thing. I couldn't understand the emotion in her words. My consciousness slipped back into darkness. When I opened my eyes, an unfamiliar white ceiling spread out above me. The smell of disinfectant stung my nose. I immediately realized I was in a hospital. "Ah!" A groan escaped my lips along with the pain. "Sarah!" Michael's voice. His hand tightly gripped mine. "Michael!" I called out weakly. "Ethan. He's fine. Mom's looking after him." Just then, the door to the room opened, and I heard small footsteps. "Mommy!" Ethan's voice. "Ethan." I tried to smile, but my face contorted with pain. Ethan approached my bed and touched my arm with his small hand. "Mommy, I was so scared," Ethan said in a trembling voice. His words squeezed my heart. "I'm sorry, sweetie. Everything's okay now," I tried to reassure him. At that moment, there was a sound outside the room. The door opened, and a uniformed figure entered. "Hello, Mrs. Thompson," the person said. "I'm Detective Johnson. I'd like to ask you a few questions about the accident." I was confused. "Accident? What accident?" My memory was hazy, and I couldn't recall what had happened. And when the police officer came to me, my husband started trembling. I felt Michael's hand shaking in mine. His expression was filled with anxiety and fear. "Michael, "What's wrong?" I asked weakly. He didn't answer, just squeezed my hand even tighter. Detective Johnson stood by my bedside. His presence made the air in the hospital room feel even heavier. "How are you feeling, Mrs. Thompson?" Johnson asked in a calm voice. "A bit confused," I answered honestly. Johnson took out a notebook and continued, "Can you tell me what you remember about the details of the accident?" I furrowed my brow. "Accident?" "Yes, the fall in the bathroom." Johnson carefully chose his words. "Actually, we received a report from the hospital. According to the doctor's diagnosis, the state of your injuries seems unusual for a simple fall." I was surprised by his words. "Unusual? How?" "The angle of the head injury and the condition of other parts of your body can't be explained by a normal fall," Johnson continued. "Furthermore, according to your child's testimony, there was a sudden power outage. However, there were no reports of power outages in the neighborhood." I was at a loss for words. Fragments of memory came back to me. Darkness, Ethan's crying, and then intense pain. I was giving Ethan a bath. I began, choosing my words carefully. "Suddenly, there was a power outage." As I spoke, I noticed something odd about Michael's behavior. His hand was trembling in mine. His face was pale, and sweat beaded on his forehead. "Michael, are you okay?" I asked worriedly. He just nodded silently. Johnson observed us as he continued his questions. "Did you find out the cause of the power outage?" There were apparently no problems with the electrical system. I was confused by his words. "Huh. But it definitely went dark." "Actually, there were no reports of power outages in the area," Johnson said carefully. "That's why we've determined that we need to investigate the circumstances of the accident more closely." At that moment, Michael suddenly stood up. "Excuse me, I need some fresh air." He left the room with shaky steps. Johnson watched him go, then turned back to me. "Mrs. Thompson, is there anyone in your family who might have a reason to want to harm you?" My heart started racing at that question. Something was wrong. This wasn't just an accident investigation. Johnson's question awakened doubts that had been sleeping within me. Margaret's cold glances, her subtle choice of words, and that strange tone in her voice right after the accident. All of it came back to me in fragments. "No, that can't be." I struggled to get the words out. Johnson looked at me with sympathetic eyes. "Mrs. Thompson, we don't believe this was a simple accident. There's evidence that the bathroom circuit breaker was intentionally tripped." As he spoke those words, something clicked in my mind. Margaret's attitude, Michael's agitation, and the police investigation. It all pointed to one terrifying possibility. "But why?" I asked in a trembling voice. Johnson answered with a serious expression, "That's what we're trying to uncover. We need to interview all family members." I nodded silently. My head was in turmoil, but I felt I needed to know the truth. That night, when Michael returned to the hospital room, I had made up my mind. "Michael, tell me the truth," I said, looking straight into his eyes. Michael sat down in the chair and let out a deep sigh. "Sarah, I wanted to protect you. But I might not be able to hide it anymore." "Hide what?" I pressed. "Mom." Michael choked on his words. "Mom, to you, to all of you." At that moment, the door opened and Margaret walked in. Her expression was hard, and there was something cold in her eyes. "Oh, were you talking about me?" Margaret's voice lacked its usual warmth. The atmosphere in the room instantly froze. I looked back and forth between Michael and Margaret, feeling that the moment of truth was approaching. In my heart, I thought of the baby growing inside me and Ethan sleeping in the next room as I summoned my courage. "Mother, please tell me the truth. What happened that night?" Margaret's expression froze for a moment. She took a deep breath, trying to appear calm, but I could see the disturbance in her eyes. "What do you mean, Sarah?" Margaret answered, feigning composure. Michael stood up and positioned himself between his mother and me. "That's enough, Mom. Let's tell her everything." Margaret glared at her son. "Michael, what are you saying?" "The police are here," Michael said, his voice shaking. "They say the circuit breaker was intentionally tripped. We can't hide it anymore." The color drained from Margaret's face. "You can't be. Are you suspecting me?" "Mom, I've known all along." Michael's voice was filled with sadness. "Your attitude towards Sarah and—" "Be quiet!" Margaret suddenly shouted. "You don't understand anything." The air in the room was suddenly filled with tension. I held my breath, watching them both. "What don't I understand?" I asked quietly. Margaret let out a deep sigh. "You wouldn't understand, Sarah. How much I—" Just then, the door opened and Detective Johnson entered. "Excuse me," he said, surveying the room. "Mrs. Thompson, we've found new evidence." All eyes in the room turned to him at his words. "What kind of evidence?" I asked nervously. "Footage from a security camera in the bathroom," Johnson said carefully. "Did any of you know it was installed?" Michael and I exchanged surprised looks. But I didn't miss the change in Margaret's expression. "Security camera." Margaret's voice trembled. "I don't know anything about that." Johnson took out a tablet. "Let me show you the footage." The screen showed the bathroom scene. Me bathing Ethan, then the sudden darkness. And then, a shocking scene appeared. Margaret sneaking into the bathroom, manipulating the circuit breaker. Then, after witnessing my fall, hurriedly leaving the room. "Mother." I was at a loss for words. Margaret collapsed into a chair. I. Why, Mom?" Michael's voice was a mix of anger and sadness. Margaret looked up, tears in her eyes, and began to speak. "I just wanted to protect Michael." "Protect? From whom?" I asked, confused. "From you, Sarah," Margaret continued in a shaky voice. "You were taking my son away, my precious son. And then Ethan too." As the truth came to light, the air in the room grew heavier. Margaret's twisted love, jealousy, and fear. All of it had created this tragedy. Johnson said quietly, "Mrs. Thompson, I'm placing you under arrest on suspicion of intentionally causing bodily harm." Margaret no longer had the strength to resist, she just hung her head. I stiffened on the bed, trying to come to terms with this shocking revelation. This was the moment when our family bonds would be put to the test. After Johnson left, only our family remained in the hospital room. A heavy silence dominated the space. "Why?" I began in a trembling voice. "Why did you do this?" Margaret looked up, tears in her eyes, and answered, "You wouldn't understand, Sarah. How could I accept someone who was taking my son away?" "Taking away?" Michael raised his voice. "Mom, Sarah is my wife. I chose her." Margaret looked at her son. "You don't understand. She changed you. Distanced you from me." "That's not true," I said quietly but firmly. "I never intended to take Michael away. I just wanted to become family. With you too." Margaret's expression wavered. "Mom," Michael approached and took his mother's hand. "We are family. Sarah, Ethan, and the baby on the way. We're all important family. But Margaret's voice shook. "What you did is unforgivable," I said with a serious expression. "But we're still family. Let's think about what to do from here on out, together." At those words, Margaret's expression softened. She slowly knelt on the floor and took my hand. "Sarah, I'm truly sorry." Her voice trembled with tears. "I was afraid. Afraid of being alone, of being forgotten." I gently squeezed her hand back. "I understand. But we won't forget you. Rather, we want to create new memories together." Michael stood between his mother and wife, placing a hand on each of their shoulders. "We can overcome this. Together." Just then, the door opened and Ethan burst in. "Mommy! Daddy! Grandma!" His innocent smile changed the atmosphere in the room instantly. Margaret hugged her grandson and cried. "Let's all do our best," I said quietly. "As a real family from now on." Several weeks later, we gathered again at my in-laws' house. This time, to celebrate a new beginning. Margaret was allowed to recuperate at home under strict supervision and was to undergo psychological counseling. She was sincerely repentant and working hard to repair relationships. In the living room, Ethan was enthusiastically thinking of names for his new little brother. "How about Hope?" he suddenly suggested. "Hope?" I asked, surprised. "Why that name?" "Because everyone got Hope, right?" Ethan answered innocently. We looked at each other and laughed. Indeed, this child had brought us hope. Margaret quietly entered the room. Her eyes no longer held that coldness, but instead a warm light. "Sarah, Michael, and Ethan," she said gently. "I've learned the true meaning of family. From now on, I hope we can walk this path together." We all joined hands. Outside the window, the spring sunlight was warming us. A new season, a new form of family, and new hope. Everything was about to begin. "Let's take a family photo," Michael suggested. "It might be the last one before hope is born." With the sound of the camera shutter, our new story began.